Hello and welcome to Books and Chit Chat with Aging and Amazing and AlzAuthors. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. I'm Mary Ann Shuko, a founder and manager at AlzAuthors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. And I'll be here with Malika Moore of Aging and Amazing, our partner organization, which is an organization that values healthy aging and caregiving. One side of the organization focuses on care management, and the other side focuses on their signature online community, which is where the Books and Chit Chat lives. Within this online community, over 200 members from around the world share their stories, resources, and tips to help support caregivers and those who are aging. Check out their online community to learn more. We're all aging and amazing. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our team who are with us today. We have Vicky Tapia, who is a founder and also a member of the management team and acquisitions editor. She is the author of Somebody Stole My Iron, a family memoir of dementia, and also Ruth Stevens, who is an acquisitions editor for fiction, and she is the author of Stage 7. Thank you both for coming. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome my friend and fellow author, Christy Byrne Yates, to Books and Chit Chat. Christy is a passionate advocate for children and parents. She's a licensed educational psychologist, writer, and speaker, and also a coach to sandwich generation parents. She helps them manage the chaos and overwhelm of raising kids while also caring for aging parents. She's a member of the AlzAuthors management team and my podcast co-host and producer, as well as our YouTube go-to person. She's the author of the extremely useful Caregiver Guide, Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. Welcome, Christy.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. It's weird to be on this side of it all. I'm usually asking all the questions, but thank you. It's nice, fun.
Yeah. It's my second time interviewing you because I did it a while back. I think when the podcast was new, and at that time we had no idea that you were going to become a podcaster with me. So Christy and I both learned how to do podcasting on our own, and
Still,
still learning. In my case, it was like reluctantly because it was the last thing I wanted to do. But here we are. We're aging and amazing. That's what that's all about.
right? Well, you're a wonderful podcaster, and it's been great. So we are learning all the time, but it's really been fun.
So I like to share this because to me, this is an astounding fact. And until I met Jean Lee, I didn't know that. I don't think I had ever met a person who had to care for two parents with dementia at the same time.
Yeah.
But now on our management team, we have 6 people and 3 of them have cared for 2 parents with dementia at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's Jean. And then my friend Vicky, who is with us tonight, and then also Christy.
Yeah.
So anybody who's cared for a parent with dementia knows how hard and heartbreaking it is, but I just can't even imagine when it's both parents. And what that means really is that you don't have the other parent to help you.
Exactly.
So can you tell us a little bit about your dementia journey, Christy, and how you got through that?
Sure. Both my parents lived up the road from us for the longest time, and it was brilliant. It was beautiful, and they were very involved with my kids, and they were really close to my son, who's now 27, and my daughter, who will be 25 in November. And they were they did everything with us. It was great. And then suddenly there were little things that they couldn't do and they needed help with. And then one thing became many things. And like many people, I was very much in denial about my mom. I just thought she was anxious about my dad, who we knew had a lot of things. He'd had a stroke in his 60s. And so little by little, sort of started to have maybe mid 70s having some more TIAs or mini strokes. So we knew he had some issues. But then my mom was becoming very forgetful and some other things. And so I really had to address the denial I felt. And then I got her to talk to her doctor. And then we were referred to a neurologist and found that she was experiencing Alzheimer's. And my dad at this point Um, we just thought that he was slowing down with the strokes, but the doctor said, no, this is really vascular dementia. So they both had a different type of dementia, and it sort of functioned differently for each of them. My mother had very classic Alzheimer's where she could remember things from many years ago, but it was like 5 minutes ago she couldn't remember. She would ask the same question many times over, and then she'd forget, and she'd do things in the home that were not helpful. I think one of the things that was a real problem was my dad had a bunch of different medications, and she was mixing up the medications because she was helping. So that was really, I think, a catalyst for us to say they need more help, that kind of thing. So it was just a balancing act and trying to figure it out with my dad. It was more about not so much forgetting, is he couldn't engage at the same level that he used to be able to. Conversations were very short. He couldn't really follow the thread of a conversation. He was such a funny and fun guy most of his life, but he lost a lot of that. They were both a little different in what was going on, and it was challenging. I had to learn quickly.
And at the same time, you were raising two young kids.
Yeah, so this is almost 10 years ago. So my kids were much younger. I think when we really started caring for them, my daughter was probably in middle school, maybe late elementary school. And my son was in middle school, then went into high school. So yeah, the tweens and teens. And I was working full time as a school psychologist. This one of the saving graces was my husband worked at home. So that was brilliant. He was there and he was able to do things with the kids that I might not have been able to. But we tried very much to always be engaged with what they were doing. And I still tried to bring my mom and dad along to different things, soccer games, volleyball games, things like that, school events, to keep them connected. And that was terrific. But no, my husband really was great. And he really loved my parents, and they really liked him a lot. So that was perfect. We didn't have that problem to deal with. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see what that would be like. Extremely difficult,
Right. Yes. Yes. And
Yeah.
he was incredibly patient with them. So I'm very grateful to him. He's here today. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to say thank you publicly, Brad. Thank you for being there. So, yeah. And that makes a difference. And I think that's one of the reasons, too, why I wanted to write the book, is that there are
Mhm.
opportunities for so many different things. I learned so much and I grew so much as a person. I became a better parent, I think. My husband and I got clued into things we needed to do differently, just in terms of our own life. And so that's why I wanted to write the book, was to give people a heads up to, listen, you might not be dealing with dementia, but your parents are going to age and you might have to care for them on some level. So here's some things to think about.
Mhm. So I had described your book earlier as being extremely helpful. And as everybody here probably realizes, that I've had to read a lot of these books. Being an acquisitions editor of AlzAuthors, I've read dozens and dozens of different kinds of books, but a lot of caregiver guides. And yours is caregiver guide, but also has memoir aspects to it as well, because you share your own personal story in the pages. But what I think makes it unique is that a lot of the guides go on about the physical care of the person and different stages and ways to manage behaviors and understanding medications and things along that line. But your book is different. You cover a lot of things that most people don't cover. So one of those things is like the theme of the book is the family legacy, and you have kind of your own spin on what that is. Can you explain that?
Sure. I think legacy has always been, we think of it as stuff and things we pass on. Sometimes it's the legacy of, could be traditions or things like that. But I really felt like my parents had given me an enormous gift. So I grew up in Ohio, but I moved out to California when I was in my 20s. And then my mother, who had been born and raised in California, made a deal with my dad when she got married that when they retired, they were going to California. And he kept his word and brought her out when they retired. But before they moved, they had already had a estate planning attorney work with them, and they had written out exactly what they wanted, many of the things that they wanted in their aging life, right? I have a brother and a sister, and they didn't want to live with any one of us. They had fairly good experiences with their parents going into assisted living when the time was necessary. And they felt like that was what they wanted for themselves. So they explicitly wrote that out. They purchased a long-term health care plan that would only pay for nursing care or assisted living. And there are still policies like that, but most of them are mostly open. But that's what they wanted. They wanted each of us to live our own lives and have our own families and do our own thing. They also were good custodians of their money so that none of us had to take care of them financially. So they weren't multimillionaires from the get-go, but they just took care of their money and they bought things wisely, and they still had fun. They did a lot of fun things. They traveled and golfed and did a lot of things, but they just weren't extravagant. And because they did all that, it was such a gift to my brother and my sister and I that they had these documents all ready for us. Their needs and their desires were expressly pointed out to us. So we knew what they needed. And when the time came, I had a blueprint. And I felt like that was the legacy of, and why I felt that like that was love, because in the end, I was free to just be there for them. I didn't have to wring my hands and think, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? It was all taken care of. And the money was there to take care of them in the best possible way. So I felt like that was the kind of legacy that was really a beautiful gift to my sister and my brother and I. And that was the turning point for my husband and I to think, we need to do this. We're young and healthy, so now's the time for us to start thinking about putting these things in place because you never know.
Yeah, I know, and a lot of people don't want to talk about these things. I had a conversation with somebody just over the weekend, and they did not want to discuss anything like this.
And it's interesting. My parents were pretty open to talking about different things. My mom and dad would say, listen, we want to talk to you about this thing and we want to be cremated. So we have joined this group. And so all you need is they give us all these little business cards. They were like, we're going to talk about, they didn't say, hey, can we talk about this? It was like, hey, we've done this and we want to share this with you. They had both lost parents and they had been through this and they had, I don't know, had good relationships with their family members along the way. So they wanted that for us. And that was what they did pass along to us. So I thought that was great.
That's great. Thank you. Did anybody have any comments or questions about this topic?
Yeah, Christy, your book is such a great resource. And I was wondering, this is actually two questions. So the first question is, since the time you wrote the book, have you found that there's a greater awareness of the whole sandwich generation issue? And has it evolved from the time you got involved?
I do think it has. I feel that term sandwich generation, when I first put it out there, I didn't even coin the term. It came from a person who was a social worker in New York back in the 80s, but now it's getting a lot of traction. So I'm involved with the people who host our podcast is the Whole Care Network, and I'm with a group in the Whole Care Network, and we're really focused on talking a lot about people in the sandwich generation. We don't always specifically call them that, but we use that term a lot, but we talk about people who are working family caregivers, and people are calling me all the time looking for a speaker on the sandwich generation. So it's starting to get a lot more attention because I don't know, it really has bubbled up to the surface. I think a lot of it came from, I really want to say COVID times. There were many families chose to live together. So grandparents were taking care of kids getting online school, mom and dad were online working, and that was not an uncommon situation. But then also just the awareness of how many people in assisted living, some people came back home because their family didn't like what was going on, that they couldn't see them. And so this intergenerational living, there was a little bubble of that, and they're seeing more and more of that in certain places. And so I think it's just become a little bit more necessary for people to talk about it. And so it's starting to get a little bit attention. So, yeah.
Mhm. Okay. And my related question, you touched on it a little bit, is of course, also authors is great, like a one-stop resource for anybody who wants information about different dementias. Is there anything like that for the sandwich generation? Is there any consortium of books and podcasts and resources?
I don't know that there's like an association or anything like that. So there's an organization that's specifically geared towards that. But I am finding that any organization that talks about aging, they are talking more about it. So like I said, I'm getting calls from people who want me to come talk to their companies and to their organizations about what's it like being in the sandwich generation, because they're seeing that in their own communities. So for instance, I just spoke to the Bankers Association, and they wanted to talk about, look, this is what some of our bank managers are going through personally, but also some of their staff and even the clientele. So you can see it through a number of different lenses. And that's what this work group in Whole Care Network is looking at, is how are employers dealing with people who are caring for people. And any of those are more than likely going to be somewhere in the sandwich generation. So yeah, it's interesting. And estate planners, I did a talk with some estate planning attorney in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they're focused a lot on the sandwich generation. So I don't know of any association, but I think it's becoming something that people are trying to focus on more. So that's another reason why I try to make my website a place that has some referrals and some services and some other things. So if you go to my website, you can download a lot of free resources I've come up with, that kind of thing. But yeah, I've learned a lot though, Ruth. I have to tell you, I have a second edition in my head because I have to update some things. There are things that I've learned that I think I could write about better now. And a lot of that comes from being part of AlzAuthors. So for sure, it's helped me a lot.
So now, Christy, I learned something about you from reading your book that I don't think I had learned before in all the time we've spent together. And that's about your childhood. And you had an autoimmune disease that affected your life greatly. And would say it also made you into a better person and taught you a lot about life and hardship and empathy and compassion. And I'd like for you to explain a little bit to us about that and also how it may have impacted your caregiving journey.
Oh, for sure. So when I was 6 years old, and I'm not afraid to tell you, I turned 63 this year. In 1967, then, when I was 6 years old, I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And it's actually one of the rarer diseases. And this was at a time when there was no such thing as special education. We didn't have those laws in place yet. That didn't happen until the mid 70s. And I was extremely lucky. I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where I was born. And there was a doctor there who was a rheumatologist who started treating children. And he developed a center at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. And that's who he saw, were kids with different types of arthritis. And he really believed in no weight bearing activities. There were not the drugs that there are available now, they didn't have them. And so they would just pump kids full of steroids. And he really wanted to try something different. And he, through a series of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and then also no weight bearing activity, which meant that there were times when I didn't go to school. I was homeschooled by my mom, who'd been a teacher. So I was lucky about that. And then I had tutors sometimes at home. But then when I was at school, I was in a wheelchair most of the time, which was very different. Teachers did not know what to do with me. I never took a day of PE, K through 12, never did physical activity or physical education. So it was just different. And I think being in a wheelchair that young, and the hard part was I was able to walk. I was fully capable and able to walk. I was just told not to walk. So then when kids would see me walk from the car, into the school and then sit down in a wheelchair, they were perplexed. And not only perplexed, they were not nice. So it was I definitely incurred a lot of bullying. And one of the things my dad just encouraged me to fight it head on, ask them what they wanted to know, find ways to inject humor, that kind of thing. He put two great big, this was back in the hippie days, right? And he put these two purple feet on the back of my wheelchair and he'd say, just tell them those are your feet. He did all kinds of fun things like that. And how I think it helped me in caring for them is I remember my dad as he was getting older and needing a wheelchair. And he'd just look up at me and he'd say, you know what this is like, don't you? And I'd say, yeah, I do, Dad. It doesn't feel good. I understand. And I think that made him feel good that I could see him in a different way than other people could. Like I understood that it was really hard to go from being an active person to being confined in a wheelchair. That was good for him to hear that from me. And it was good for me to be able to give that back to him. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on Christy?
Yeah, Christy, I'm a big fan of your book. And one thing I really loved about it was the way you talked about the legacy that you left for your children was how you modeled caring for your parents. It wasn't specific things, the ways you changed your relationship with them. You just showed them what it was like to take care of people that you love. And I just thought that was something surprised me about that I didn't expect to find in your book. So I guess my question is just that, did you have a big conversation with your children about caregiving for your parents, or how they should treat their grandparents, or was it something that sort of came out in dribs and drabs over a period of time?
It was probably dribs and drabs, but I have to tell you, I have a little bit of amnesia from that time because I was so busy all the time. Like, I don't know that I ever specifically said, this is how you do this, but there were times when I did do that. Like, I do remember helping my son learn how to transfer because he was the older of my two kids and he was starting to drive. And I would show him how to help my dad transfer from the wheelchair into the car. He was more than willing to help, but I wanted to show him the mechanics of that. And I knew how to do that. So not only had I experienced that as a child, but also as a school psychologist, I worked with a lot of kids with physical disabilities. So learning how to do that was something that I could teach him how to do as well. But my daughter, who I think is on this, listening to this right now too, she was a natural with my mom. She was very close to my mom, and she would answer my mother's questions over and over again as if it was the first time they were asked. And it was just, it gets me choked up to say it because it was beautiful. And she was just great at doing that. And I wasn't always a great mom. There were times when they saw me fall apart. But we, in our family, the four of us, we would talk at dinner time about what was going on. And I didn't try to tell them how to be. They naturally loved my parents, so I didn't have to encourage that. I didn't have to encourage them to do anything with them. But we talked about what was going on. And they were old enough by this point that I could talk to them a little bit. They weren't little kids anymore. And they learned by being with them. And I think that natural relationship they had with them just pulled them through a lot of it. So yeah, I wasn't always, there were, like I said, there were things. I wrote a chapter for a book in another book that one of those compilation books, and I tell a story of a dinner, but I was a horrible daughter. I was just really rude to my mom and dad. And I really understood at the end of this dinner that it was my own anticipatory grief. I was just in so much pain seeing that my dad couldn't even hold a fork anymore. And I just lost it. And my kids were so great. And my son, in fact, just mouthed words to me over the table. Mom, be nice. And I thought, oh my God. And that was my awareness of my kids are watching me. I am training them. And I am not showing them a good thing here tonight. I need to fix this. So we talked about it as a family, and they were so great. My daughter and my son just hugged me after my parents left and just said, we're so sorry. We know this is hard for you. It's hard for us too. And we just talked about our grief. We talked about this is what's happening to us right now, watching my mom and dad at this point. And that was really the last year of their life. That was earlier in the year, but they were just really, I'm so proud of them. They're just really wonderful people. So I feel like this was very hard for them. And yet I see what incredibly compassionate people they are now. And that's normal, natural stuff that's happening. And instead of sheltering them, my husband and I just tried to carry them through it the best way we could.
That's beautiful. One of the comments that I highlighted in the book was, sometimes we are most dangerous when we think we know things. And one of the things I always say is how when dementia comes, everything you need to know on day one. And I just have encountered so many people who are not open to learning and somehow think that they already know what they need to do. They have enough knowledge. Can you speak on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised I was so brilliant, because that really is a great thing, isn't it? I can't believe I wrote that. That was really terrific, because really, Marianne, we just, sometimes I know I will find myself going, well, I know this, or I'll talk to people who are like, yeah, I already know that. And I'm like, that's going to come back and bite you in the butt. So be open to the possibility that there might be a different way, that there might be another thing you need to learn, that kind of thing. And it was humbling. Here I was, a school psychologist. I thought I knew about cognition. I thought I knew about memory, and I thought I knew about certain things. And then I was confronted with my own denial about my mother. And it was like, don't think you know everything, Christy. And being open to learning and open to asking questions and open to humbling myself and saying, I don't know, was the best thing I could do, because it's just impossible to know everything. It's just impossible. And so there's this hubris we bring with us sometimes of, well, I know all these things. I'll be the first person people ask me questions. I'm like, I don't know, but let me see if I can find out, because I don't want to give inaccurate information, and I don't want to say I can't help you, forget it. So we all have to keep learning, and things change. That's the other thing, Marianne, and everybody. Boy, just take my arthritis, for example. What we were doing in 1967 for kids with rheumatoid arthritis is not what we're doing anymore. Right. And we have learned so much. And so we can criticize the past, but that's not really helpful, because no one was trying to harm anyone. We were all trying to do the right things in most cases. I really do believe that. I'm a very optimistic person. But mistakes of the past weren't always made out of a meaning of harm. Sometimes they were what people were trying to do well, and then we have learned. So I see that in education, right? So special education used to be not great, and there's still things that could be improved, but it's a heck of a sight better than it was without any of it. So we have to look at all things. We're always learning and growing, and things get better. We sharpen the saw.
So your professional work and all of your knowledge and training helped, I think, you brought that with you into your caregiving situation, and it helped you and it helped your family. And I think it helped you in the writing of the book. You have a lot of nice little gifts in its pages that people can use to help develop care plans. I like the concept of the individual energy plan. That was really great. And about checking your mindset. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah. So being in schools as a school psychologist, that's what I was doing all day, every day. So, and the IEP in that setting is an individual education plan, but it just means you have a goal. But the thing that I love about it is And listen, some people have terrible experiences with special education. So I'm not here to tell you that everything you think is wrong with it is right. It's just, it's a concept. It's a way you can put yourself in place for something. And I think I tried to call it an individual energy plan because we can be sucked dry with this. But one of the things is you don't know where you're going until you have a plan, right? Like if you're in a car and you want to go someplace you've never been before, you're going to plug in the GPS coordinates, right? You're going to say, I want to go to this store, and it's going to tell you how to get there. But if you don't know where you are, you're not going to get to the next place. So you have to have some assessment at the beginning to tell you where you are. And that's what I think was key for me, is I had to really look at what do my parents need? And then I had to look at what have they told me they wanted? So how can I then help to make that come true for them, right? They had a plan. What do I need to do to put that into action? So that meant talking to the estate attorney. That meant talking to the financial planner. That meant talking to the people of the assisted living. It meant getting the right paperwork for me to be able to talk to the doctors. It meant me getting all those things in place so that then when there was a goal, and my goal really was, can they have how do they want to live the rest of their lives? How do they want this to be? And that was how I put it into place. But I also think, look, not everybody's a school psychologist. Not everybody's familiar with an IEP. So what's your area of brilliance? Because we all have one. If it's, I'm a project manager at my job, well, then think about the project you've got going and put your project manager skills into place. Or maybe you're a baker. Well, okay, it's a recipe. What can you put into place here and make it all work? So when we find what we're good at and we use that to help us put this thing into motion, or at least stay ahead of the game, then we have something we can hold on to. It's a touchstone. So that's just, I think that's the way I look at it, is you don't have to go back to school and become a gerontologist to take care of your parents. You just lean into some of the people who have that brilliance, but then what are you good at and how can you organize your life that way?
I know that when I tackled my problem with my parents and stepfather, I was so overwhelmed, but yet at the same time, I was a nurse and I was a case manager, and I navigated people through this every day in my job. And then one day I realized, take off the daughter cap, put on the nurse's cap, and figure it out. And then that made all the difference. Yeah, I use my skills because everybody has them.
Yeah.
And they can be adapted. So can you read something from the book? Did you pick something out?
I did. I have something from the end, I think. So this is the final chapter, and it's a section that the mini title here is Building a Legacy of Love. So this time in the sandwich generation is rich. The lessons we learn don't reveal themselves right away. Our memories gently age and shift, and we learn to let go of the painful times and move beyond grief. After some time, we can look back and try to make sense of it all. A year or so after my parents' passing, I was able to forgive myself for times I wasn't my best as a daughter, sibling, parent, or spouse. I could acknowledge that I'd done my best and not beat myself up. I became a better parent, too, connecting again with my children as young adults who had been through the journey with me. We still talk a lot about Grandma and Grandpa, and my children have been willing and supportive consultants on this book. With time, I could also see how I had changed for the better. I learned a lot of lessons from my parents. One of the best gifts they gave me was planning for the end of their lives. They made the tough choices so their children didn't have to. Assisted living, cremation services, burial at the National Cemetery, Catholic Mass. They also put enough money aside for their care. My siblings and I don't have to accrue debt, and that was for us the gift of freedom. We were and are lucky. This isn't the case for everyone. My husband and I have spent time trying to do the same for our children. We talk about our wishes for the future and for end of life. We try to normalize conversations about end-of-life issues so that our kids can ask questions or at least feel comfortable knowing we are not leaving everything up to them. But we don't know exactly what tough choices they will still have to make. Which one of them will have that painful car key conversation with us? We also emphasize our value of compassion. How does compassion continue to show up in their lives? How are we continuing to be compassionate with others in our lives? What I learned while writing this book through the tears and the frustrations is that people naturally want to give and want to have a way to contribute to others. I probably already knew this, but it was driven home as I wrote this book. I look back on how much my parents gave me, but also how much my children have given me and the contributions made by others. You will take many gifts from this journey. May it be a legacy of love. And I really do feel like people want to help other people. I find that so much. And yet we're so afraid to ask for help. I don't know why, on the one hand, we're given these messages in our lives like, do it yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take it on. And that's great. But you know what? People really like to help other people. And when you ask someone, more than likely, someone will help you. I have always found that to be true. So
I agree. So many of the books in our collection were written by people who didn't want to take all that they learned and just let it die with them.
Yeah.
They wanted to share. And so that's how a lot of these books exist, you know?
Yeah, for sure. When I went back to work, I took a little bit of time off. And when I went back to work, people were, and I say this in the book, they were just crawling out of the woodwork. Hey, Christy, what did you do about this? Oh, my dad just went on hospice. Oh, what about that? How do I handle? And I thought, we are not talking enough about that. So I will take some time at some point and start talking about it. And that was why I wrote the book.
Mhm. Right. Does anybody have any other questions or comments to add? Hi, Malika. There you go.
What I find is sometimes people think they are healed from things. And then when that caregiving comes around, the recital that their parent missed, or when they left, or that argument they had, or all these things that were gone, or maybe people didn't deal with, they suppressed, that were maybe traumatic in their own
Yeah.
respect. I feel like caregiving is the perfect storm, like for all of those things to come up. What advice would you give or recommendations would you give for people going through?
That's a great question. And I will preface my answer also by saying I had a really great relationship with my parents, and I know not everyone has a great relationship with their parents. There are people who are caring for parents or other people, maybe it's a parent, a spouse, a friend, whatever, who maybe they did not have a great relationship with. I know people who've cared for a parent they felt was abusive. I have a friend who is still caring for her mother, and she feels like as a teenager, I had to raise my mother because she was drinking and drugging, and now here I am again caring for her again, and this is just too much. And I can't, that's so hard, but it's so real, and it's happening all the time. So I am not here to say to anyone, you just have to love that person. I think what's important and I do use the word love a lot. I think what can get us through is leaning into the love you have for yourself. And that may even be hard, right? Like maybe you have a lot of damage from childhood and it's hard to even lean into, I love myself, but that might be a place to go. Like, what kind of person do I want to be in this life? And so maybe I'm not doing it for this person because I love them so much, but this is the person I'm choosing to be right now. It's also leaning into love for, if you have children, what are you showing them? So if you're like that dinner that I told you about with my parents, I felt terrible that I was role modeling not being a nice person, being short-tempered and irritable. And yet that was grief really showing up for me in a weird, not so weird, really just a powerful way. But when I lean into love for my kids, I think about, I want them to see what compassion really looks like, what love really looks like. And so love isn't always like, everything's wonderful, you're my favorite person, I love you dearly. Sometimes love is just showing up, doing something well, being kind. And that's also taking care of yourself too, because when we're cruel to someone else, I don't believe it helps us. So that's where I'd say to lean into love is like, who do you want to be? And who do you want to be as a parent raising your kids? And sure, things come up. Like, it's not like I didn't have disagreements with my siblings. There were times. And that's a really tough thing, right? Like, you show up with your siblings and suddenly you're all 12 again. Like, you may be 45, but that thing that happened when you were 12, it's in the room again. And you have to think about it. And part of it is growing into that and realizing it just doesn't play here. It's not, this is not serving anyone. We can deal with that another time if we even need to deal with it at all. It's a tough road, Malika, and you might, as a therapist yourself, have better advice on that. But I think that those are some of the things that I think are important, is to just, but I will say this, it takes time away to be able to see that, because when you're in the midst of it, it's fraught. And so have some grace for yourself, have some kindness for yourself, and then start up again the next day and try again.
Thank you. And I have a comment. I want to thank you for your book, for your openness and your transparency, because it is very different when you're in the driver's seat versus directing it, even if you have a background. So I thank you for being so transparent and sharing your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Glad to partner with you on these. This is great.
One of the things I loved about it is your concept of the sunset. And it's on the book cover, which is beautiful. And then how you equate the whole thing. And it's a scene that comes up again and again throughout the book. And I thought that was really beautiful.
I wanted to try, the thing about it is, all of this is like I say, the sunset is a normal, natural thing. But so's living and so's dying. It's normal and natural, even though death doesn't always, a particular death doesn't always seem natural. Doesn't seem natural to say, well, dementia is just natural, because it's not natural. But what's natural is that we're all going to pass on, and we're all going to experience loss. And so in that loss, we can also experience the other things like life and rebirth and different things. So I think that was my way of pulling nature into it too. There it
It was
is.
so well done. So well done. Do you have any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to say that I think that, Christy, when you lost things at the dinner party or at the dinner table, that was really important for your children to see your vulnerability in that way, and the fact that this is a hard thing that you were going through, and they could probably relate to it as well. I'm sure they weren't judging you, but it's just people going through really extraordinarily difficult things, and you just were a human being acting like a human being acts, and they understood that.
I agree with you. Listen, they know I'm not perfect, but they're wonderful people. And yeah, they knew. He knew, Mom, this isn't who you are. It's just, we're so sad that you're so sad, and we're sad too. So we all just gathered together and cried. Thank you for that, though. Thank you, Flory.
Thank you, Lori. So can you tell us where we can find your book, and how do we find you on social media and all that good stuff?
So ChristyYates.com. And you can find my book there, but you can also find my book on AlzAuthors.com, which is where I think you should go find it. And it'll be in the show notes, and you can get it there. It's available on Amazon, and it's available as an ebook, as a paperback, and I have an Audible version, all on Amazon. And then you can also go to any online bookstore and you can order it through those. So you can get it on Barnes & Noble online. And then my website has a lot of other kinds of resources. So I have any media appearances that I've done. Those will be up there. And then I'm on socials, all the socials. I'm not very active on X or Twitter, but on Instagram and Facebook, Christy B. Yates. So, and LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, so you can find me there.
That's wonderful. Anything else from our audience here before we say goodbye? So I just want to thank everyone for being here. And be sure to visit our blog, podcast, and shop at AlzAuthors.com to find more resources. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mary Ann with exciting news. AlzAuthors has published a brand new anthology, Poetry for the Dementia Journey, now available in ebook and paperback through Amazon. Within its pages, you'll discover a variety of voices writing about the diversity of dementia care experiences, caring for a mother or father or spouse, witnessing the decline of a sibling, reflections on the time before the diagnosis, the years of care, and the aftermath. Poetry provides us with a meaningful way to explore our experience and emotions regarding dementia and to express ourselves when we encounter the many different joys and dilemmas caregiving can bring. You'll find details on how to order the book in the show notes. Please remember to leave a review on the book sales page once you've read it. Reviews do help boost a book's visibility and helps readers find it. Thank you for your support of our efforts to erase the silence and stigma that often accompany a dementia diagnosis.
Caregiving is a challenge, whether your person has dementia or not. Finding helpful tips and learning new strategies from people in the know is critical. That's why we at AlzAuthors love the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast from Elizabeth Miller, who also happens to be an AlzAuthor. Elizabeth speaks from experience and has important and often fun conversations with other caregiving experts and professionals. And we appreciate learning tips on self-care, discovering new resources, and feeling empowered to support ourselves as caregivers. You can find the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast wherever you download your favorite podcasts, or visit the website happyhealthycaregiver.com.